A blizzard can't stop us from talking consumer goods on this CG edition of Industry Focus. Greetings, fools. Sean O'Reilly here at Fool Headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. It is Tuesday, January 26, 2016, and joining me after an hour-long commute from D.C. to Alexandria is a true snow warrior, Mr. Vincent Shen. So, Vince, did you enjoy your blizzard experience?
I did.
I suspect you did what everybody else on the East Coast did, which was 70 million East Coast residents all united in watching Netflix for 48 hours straight. I got my sister-in-law started on Mad Men. It was awesome.
Oh, you did. I did watch some Netflix, but I also ventured out to, like, Saturday night, took a walk.
Was it a magical winter wonderland?
Yeah, it was really coming down at that point, so it was just kind of nice to walk around. There's very few people on the street, a few other...
Did you walk down the middle of the street like everybody was doing?
Of course, a few other brave souls trying, kind of just wandering around, seeing what it was like. But, a lot of snow, and I think Baltimore, D.C., and New York all got over 20 inches.
Baltimore got 29.
Yeah, I think they're actually particularly hard.
I was in the office pool here, and I called for 30 inches because I thought that's what they were talking about for here, but it drifted a little bit north, and Baltimore got the 30 inches. And, like, I think towns a little bit further out, like an hour out, like Winchester, Virginia, they got a ton of snow.
Yes, I believe the highest snowfall came for a really small town in West Virginia, and it was something like 42 inches.
Yeah.
So even more than we got.
Cool. So I don't know, half the office is still empty. Like, the roads are still crazy here. But anyway.
Absolutely.
Well, first and foremost, I did want to touch on a fun Airbnb story. Somebody built an igloo in New York and tried to rent it out on Airbnb.
Yeah, so in the spirit of this, this storm that we had, Winter Storm Jonas, right? That's what people were referring to it as. We just thought this was a really fun story to share, where there was a gentleman in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, so right across the river from my old neighborhood, actually, in New York, and enough snow for him to build an igloo, obviously. Came out pretty well.
Did he put a bed in it?
As a joke.
Did he put a bed in it?
I'm not sure, actually, but as a joke, he put on Airbnb for $200.
Maybe a futon?
Which
$200 a night?
Pretty rich rate. And
Man.
And it was more of a prank, obviously, but Airbnb ended up taking it down, even though they do have igloos
in Iceland. I'm sure they do.
Have igloos as one of their categories in terms of, like, the different properties. So it's not unheard of.
No, I'm sure you can go to Northern Europe. There's, like, hotels that are built out of ice. Like,
well, technically, they shut it down because of
structural concerns.
But I just thought it was really funny, and just gives you an idea, if you look at the pictures online, which there are plenty of, how much snow came down.
I appreciate the hustle of that man.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so really, before we dive in, actually the big story for our listeners today is Coach actually showed off that you basically reported first sales growth quarter in like 10 quarters or something crazy.
Pretty strong, and especially considering, we've had previous episodes talking about how weak retail has been, especially for apparel and things like that. For them to bounce back like this, we'll get to that, but it's good to see.
But yeah, before we did that, I did want to talk about, I saw an interesting story this morning, and it pertains to Whole Foods, but it applies to literally every retailer out there, because I'm sure you went shopping right before the blizzard. I went shopping for the blizzard. I bought like 4 gallons of water just on the off case that, I'm such an idiot. Anyway.
Yeah, keeping in mind that you live in a high-rise apartment building.
I don't know. Anyway, I got a baby to think of.
Yeah, of course.
So basically, everybody's stockpiling food and supplies, and you hear about this every time, like a hurricane comes and all this stuff. Bottom line, is this big business for stores? Does it matter?
Well, you actually brought up a really good point when we were coming down to the studio. So, this is something that came up as well for me personally. Last night, we went to our nearby Giant in our neighborhood, and there were, like, very little fresh produce, no eggs whatsoever.
It looked like the apocalypse, right?
Very little milk. The bread aisle, it was, ravaged, essentially. And
in order to check out, you had to go through the Thunderdome.
So... Gina had asked me, like, is is this like this 1 week essentially boon in sales all over the Northeast, huge population centers, does that end up having an impact for some of these, for a company like Kroger's, Whole Foods Market, things along those lines? And ultimately, I started to look into it, but I realized like it's such a short term, blip on the radar. Sure, it was a big storm, 20
and they
inches.
definitely sell things they wouldn't normally buy. I don't usually buy 4 jugs of water.
Exactly. So there's definitely a lift, and you could even argue that stores that sell like salt for sidewalks and shovels will benefit, but it's such a small blip. It's seasonal.
It is not a consistent cash flow thing.
Snow's going to fall every year, so yeah, it's not something that I would consider to be even close to the basis for like I want to buy Whole Foods now.
Well, and it might even be playing catch up because I remember a month ago. It was basically when Macy's and Nordstrom and everybody were reporting, and they're like, yeah, our quarters have stunk so far because it's been really warm.
Yes.
And one of the highest margin things they sell is winter coats because you gots to have one, and they can charge full price, and da-da. And people were putting it off. I mean, we had several 50, 60-degree days in December here. I rode my bike a couple of weeks ago for the heck of it.
Yeah, no, you bring up a really good point. So on the one hand, we can the retailers have argued that the extended time or in the extended warm weather during the winter hurt them, but in this case, with all the snow falling, suddenly people have this stark realization like, oh, okay, like
I have to think that a few winter coats were sold last week.
Yeah,
before
exactly.
The storm arrived.
So will that help some of the apparel retailers bounce back a little bit for when they report this first quarter of the year? We'll see what happens.
Kind
but again,
maybe, but
it's going to be probably more of a minimal effect than anything else, but it's interesting to think about and how there's economics to these blizzards.
Yeah, I'll never forget, and then we'll move on. This is like 10 years ago, and CNBC did this special on the age of Walmart. And I don't know if our listeners are aware, but Walmart has they basically have supercomputers, like deep blue type crazy awesome computers. And they have all this data on what sells when and all this stuff. And they gave this example of how more people right before a hurricane in Florida and the Carolinas and stuff.
Of course.
They are 26% more likely to buy strawberry Pop-Tarts with an impending hurricane than they are at any other time. So right before the hurricane hits, Walmart's down there, stock their shelves with about 20-30% extra strawberry Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, maybe put it right front and center for when people walk in.
Isn't that crazy? What in the human brain says, hurricane, strawberry Pop-Tart? Like how
days at home. Yeah. Breakfast, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Non-perishable for a certain period of time. Anyway, okay. Well, before we move on, I wanted to, talking about designer handbag sales, I wanted to point our listeners to a little something we industry-focused contributors put together in the spirit of the new year. It is our financial New Year's resolutions. Just go to resolutions.fool.com to check it out. Again, that is resolutions.fool.com. Vince, what was your resolution? Paying for your wedding?
Yes, exactly. Well, part of that, I'd love for our listeners to check out some of the pieces that our industry focus contributors wrote.
We came up with some good stuff.
To give you a preview, though, for mine, basically had to do, we were planning for wedding costs, and it just kind of blew up into this bigger picture conversation in terms of, how we should invest and how we should start planning for our future. And it ended up being at times a painful conversation, or not just kind of stressful with all the wedding planning as well to keep in mind, but overall we're way better off having had that conversation.
Gina doesn't want you to spend an entire year's salary on this thing, does she?
No.
Gina's a very smart girl.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
But a lot of people do spend more than they can afford. Some people take on wedding debt just to have that special day, and it's definitely something you should be thinking about if you're making huge financial decisions like that, because sometimes these weddings cost as much as the down payment on a house.
It's crazy. Cool. All right, so without further ado, Coach, which it's like the perennial value stock. Like since I started at the Fool in late 2013, it's always been like, wow, Coach is really cheap. What's going like perennial just beaten up. It's like it's a great brand. It's still earning money, even though it's a little bit less. Chinese growth, I'm sure, was talked about. But they finally showed some sales growth. So what's going on?
All right. So big picture context here. Coach has been struggling for the past couple of years now. Overall, I'd say it was a combination of too much promotional.
Just say
selling.
Michael Kors, Vince. Just say it.
Definitely more competition from the likes of Michael Kors or Kate Spade. You're absolutely right. But they got really big into doing these sales. I think hurt their brand image a little
It takes
bit.
away the luster of it, for sure.
Exactly. So for this most recent quarter that they reported, their fiscal 2016 second quarter ended December 26th, so includes, pretty much the most important period in terms of the holiday shopping season. This was their first, I believe after 9 or 10, you said, quarters, where it was like declining year-over-year revenue. Finally, they were able to buck that trend. Break that that streak. So net sales were actually up 7% year over year in constant currency, 4% if you include the effects because they're international business, of course. And their adjusted earnings per share were about 68 cents, which down slightly year over year, but beat most Wall Street estimates. So overall, the company, like I said, is going through that transition where management right now is really focused on cutting their underperforming stores. They're reducing some of those.
So yet another
promotions.
Retailer closing locations.
Exactly.
Wow.
They're improving their product quality, just trying to focus on longer term, like restoring that brand reputation. But that costs money. So as a result, during this quarter, we saw their SG&A expenses go up a little bit. They're also integrating their Stuart Weitzman acquisition, which they made early last year, I think.
Was that big?
About close to $600 million. So not huge.
That's bigger than I was expecting.
In terms of its contribution, they mentioned that, they've seen a lot. They're very, very encouraged by initial results from that segment. I think Boots, for example, did really well despite the warm weather, just in terms of the big trend right now. You see boots on a lot of people, and Stuart Weitzman's just a pretty small portion, about 7.5% of their top line. But like I said, management's very, very encouraged by the results that they've seen, and breaking down in terms of the geographic segments, which you'll see big differences. So where in one case, their North American stores continue to post losses, their comparable store sales are down 4%. But you mentioned China. Particularly mainland China did really well for them. I think sales were up double digits.
Beijing has the world's largest Coach store.
Oh, really?
Right? It is the world's largest Coach store. I saw it is in Beijing.
Oh, okay. See,
there's a reason for that.
I can't say I'm surprised. International sales overall for the company, revenue was up 9% year over year in constant currency. And then for mainland China, it was very strong, but there's some weakness still in Macau and Hong Kong.
I'm not surprised, but it's kind of wild that it's hitting Coach now, because you obviously saw, Wynn and Las Vegas Sands kind of saying, yeah, things are going rough over there right now. So
I hadn't thought about that situation. When we've covered it previously, it's always been focused on the gaming side.
Right.
But
it affects the entertainment side. And
absolutely.
The deluxe.
And the shopping side, of course. Hong Kong's known, has some world-class shopping, and I'm sure that's not helping. But other than China, in terms of the international segment, Europe and Japan also saw pretty strong results, double-digit numbers in terms of improvements. So this company, their shares were up, I think last I checked about half an hour ago, up over 9% today, on top of the positive momentum from these earnings. The stock fell about 13% in 2015, which kind of honestly mirrored a lot of other retailers, but it's down over 50% from its peaks in 2012. So obviously management is focused on that recovery process, and it's a good sign to see here, not only in terms of integrating that acquisition, but just overall their international business. I think management also mentioned that for North America, they're hoping to see comps turn positive by the end of this fiscal year. So definitely a nice change, and to see after 9-10 quarters of down revenue.
So you obviously read the press release, the stock. Do you buy it right now? Not the stock per se, but do you buy what management's saying? Does it make you somewhat bullish?
Yeah, I think that I have gone into a few stores, and obviously this is just my personal experience, but I feel like in terms of the styles and the their offerings now, it's definitely going a little bit more in terms of their traditional, Coach traditionally was known for really fine leather products, and I think for a period they had offerings that were very heavily branded, started moving away from that because most fashion trends moved away from that, and now they're kind of restoring that customer traffic and sales, and I think what management's doing now is important. It's necessary.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for your thoughts, Vince.
Thanks, Sean.
If you're a loyal listener and have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at industryfocus@fool.com. Again, that's industryfocus@fool.com. As always, people in this program may have interest in the stocks that they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against those stocks, so don't buy or sell anything based solely on what you hear on this program. For Vincent Shen, I'm Sean O'Reilly. Thanks for listening, and Fool on.